Hello! If you do not know, I'm Elaine and I'm a tour guide in the French Quarter in New Orleans. I have a lot of stories from my tours. Now, if you want to hear the ghost stories I tell on my tours, you're going to have to come down here and pay for it. But if you want to hear stories of weird things that happen while I am leading mostly drunk strangers through the French Quarter, I got you. So, as a tour guide, there are a couple of things that you get used to your tourists doing. But even though I'd seen a lot of people have guests on their tours start fights, in fact, my very first weekend as a tour guide, I remember parking my car, getting out, and Julia, I believe it was across the street with one of her tours, and one of the guests was screaming obscenities at her and looked like he was about to fight her. Luckily, there were other guests in the tour that were, dealing with him. But I managed to make it a good 5 years before I ever had more, like, any fights on my tour. But this one weekend, quite recently, I had 3 fights in one weekend. The first one was a pretty simple one. It was just two guests disagreeing with each other. Specifically, one of the guests would not shut up. I'd talked to them a couple of times, and they were mostly hanging out away from the rest of the group, so I thought they weren't bothering anyone until one of the other guests started screaming at them about being rude and interrupting the tour. And I tried my best to de-escalate and keep going, because that's what you do. But it only got worse until finally, at the last stop, I basically had to cut the story off a little bit early and declare, "Tour's over, go away." And still, this pair went down the street screaming at each other. So I got to scream down the street, act like adults, go different directions, you never have to see each other again. Still not sure if they ever, broke apart or if they ended up in jail somewhere. But the second fight of that weekend, I was doing a story, and as often happens, some asshole in a car pulled up behind me, stopped, screamed something rude, and kept moving. Now, the problem is, this was the Bad Bitches tour, which means that my guests were very proud of being upstanding, strong women. So one of them decides to scream back at the guy. And he had already started moving when she screamed back at him. And she screamed something to the extent of, "Oh, don't say that to us, don't be rude." But this dude pulled his car over, got out, and started screaming at us from down the street. And she is trying her best to go fight him, and one of her friends is holding her back, and I'm sitting there being like, "Please don't, please don't. You don't know if that man has a gun." But the thing that I found hilarious about it was the guy in the car was probably 5'1", maybe 5'2" at the tallest, not exceptionally big guy. And the woman was like a 7-foot tall Amazon. She could have slaughtered him. But the third fight that weekend was the weird one. That fight, oh God, that tour was terrible. There was a group that arrived on some form of drugs. I do not know what, but they were high in some kind of way. And they were having some kind of night. But the most important thing about them is, A, one of the girls kept insisting on standing directly in front of me while I was talking, and every single pause, every time I paused in the middle of a sentence even, she'd go, "Oh my." And when finally I had to stop the story to be like, "Honey, please just hold comments till the end of the story," she started changing to, "Wow," every time I paused. This was not helpful, but I still could have just ignored it and tried my best to keep moving until we were passing 3 guys who I know are homeless because I see them sleeping on that bench on a regular basis, but are perfectly innocent, nice guys. They have never said a single rude word to me. In fact, usually they compliment me when I walk by. And I don't know what the hell happened, but I'm a few feet further along and I look up and this crazy high chick is fighting the homeless guys. Now, I try to stop them for a minute and finally just basically shout at her, "Either come with us or we're leaving you." And we leave her. But the problem is she doesn't stay left. She finds us at the next stop, and it seems that her boyfriend stayed behind to continue fighting the homeless people. So she was constantly, for that stop, calling him to ask him where he was, while one of her friends tried to convince her that she should probably just leave the tour now. But it took a while. It took almost 10 minutes for them to finally just nope out of there. And I have never been happier to see people turn and walk away from my tour. Overall, that was a terrible weekend. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and thank you for listening.